Welcome to Camera Ready and Able, the podcast that explores the intersection of media change and personal growth. I'm your host, Barna Abel, and my calling is to help you tap into your superpowers to thrive on camera and in life, and to make an impact on the world. This episode is a rebroadcast of my appearance on life coach Nicole Baker's Imperfect Success podcast, discussing one of my favorite topics, stop shoulding yourself. Because the shoulds are perfectionism adjacent. The shoulds are a list of false rules we tell ourselves that feed our narrative but ultimately hold us back. Like, I should be richer, thinner, more successful, etc., etc., etc. The shoulds are one of the ways we live out perfectionism, and they get in everyone's way, at least some of the time. My shoulds are often a loud discussion inside my head, and I finally learned to turn down the volume.
Welcome, Barbara, to the Imperfect Success podcast. I'm so happy you're here today.
You have no idea how happy I am. First of all, I'm really, really flattered and honored to be invited. And always a conversation with you is it's energizing.
Well, honestly, having me on your show, I had such a freaking blast. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, but I want to start off with the all-knowing question, which is, who are you and what do you do? Basically, tell everyone how much of a fucking badass you are.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm actually, quite a bit of an introvert. So to actually stand up on, virtually on your podcast and say I'm a badass is its own badass act. So thank you. So, professionally, I would say what I really do is I'm a multimedia coach and creative advisor. And functionally, what I do is I help people of impact make an impact or make a bigger impact. That is, where I fit into the story. I always say when I do what I do well, I help my clients do what they do better, and then they can go out and change the world.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm part of that process. I help people believe in themselves. One of my gifts is, and it's also part of my career as a casting director, is I see the awesome in you often before you see the awesome in you, or the ability to tap into the awesome in you in ways that you hadn't considered before.
If that's not your guys' slogan, that needs to be. That's so freaking good. So in your journey to having the freaking list of credentials that you do, I always like to ask people, what were some of the imperfect moments along the way? We hear so often overnight success stories, quote unquote, and that can really mess with our perfectionist heads, right? We think that if I'm not making mega progress on the first go, then I'm a failure. So I always love peeling apart the backstory. What were some moments where it was almost like throwing your hands up in the wall and saying, oh my gosh, is my dream ever going to come true?
Nicole, this could be an entire season of your podcast talking about all my imperfect moments on the journey to my current imperfect self. But part of it begins with two. It's like, because I'm the last of the generation of women where having a career was not always the expectation. I was raised when women were still, our number one goal and expectation was to marry, have kids and make a home. So one of the reasons I mention that is because you do grow up and you have goals and dreams. And I remember in fifth grade doing some project, and my dream was to win an Academy Award and to be the first woman president. And then of course, I'm like 10 or 11 then. And so with the years, adding those years on, that, my dream is being squelched by people telling me, don't dream that. I can get really honest. I mean, I remember being high school, going to a father-daughter thingamabob with my dad. And I guess a well-meaning dad asked me about where I wanted to go to college. And I was growing up in California, and I said I wanted to go back east because that seemed very exciting and glamorous to me to come to an East Coast, liberal arts college. And he said, why do you want to spend the rest of your life on the East Coast? I was like, what do you mean? He goes, because you're going to meet your husband, and you're going to live where he lives and where his job is. And that was the expectation. So I just like to really, really be clear. And so then it's, you graduate from college and it's a little bit confusing because there are these dualities about that. It's like, who am I? Where do I go? So I was kind of not starting from a very strong place. But I knew, like so many people with a dream, I wanted, a more exciting, glamorous life than I had it, growing up in the suburbs, which in hindsight were really nice and great. And I grew up in a very safe area and a tremendous amount of privilege around that, and to be able to ride my bike and not worry and all those things. But when you're that kid, in that Super 8 movie, I was dreaming of, glamour and excitement, whether that was New York City or Hollywood or whatever it was. So fast forward, I somehow propelled myself into the music business.
Can you talk that out a little? How did you somehow?
So I created a fanzine with friends of mine about the Los Angeles music scene, which we had no idea what we were doing. We just did it. And
Wait,
that was
is fanzine like a fan magazine?
Exactly.
Thank you. I just like I could feel my cogs whirling in my head. I was like, okay, you can do this, Nicole. Amazing.
And so that gave us entree. And by the way, it was such a DIY culture. It'd be no different than like podcasting or a lot of other things where it's like you make it and then you tell people you've made it. And it gave us a reason, to go interview people, which I discovered I loved, and going to gigs. And I told you this could go on forever. So that leads to me doing college radio. I became the music director of my college radio station. I did tons of interviews on my college radio show. Loved it, which is, there's a through line from that to my doing my own podcast and loving the interview process. Being a casting director is a lot about the interview process, because you're interviewing people and talent and getting the best out of them, finding stories, working in documentaries for decades. And that's so about finding the story and creating trust with people so that they can share their story. So I did that. That led to internships. I was the first college intern at Virgin Records in the UK. During its, incredible peak. I used to make tea for Richard Branson when he would come into the office. It was super exciting. He liked a relatively weak cup of tea with a lot of milk in it. Whereas Simon Draper, his cousin, who was the managing director, he liked double strength tea with a little bit of milk.
I love how that just still lives rent free in your brain.
Oh my God. My nickname was Double Tea With, which was Simon's order. And it was just a magical time. So I did all that. And then, I get a job in music management for a very, very powerful company. And this is, not to get too heavy, but this is a story that's not surprising to people when, you read the paper. First of all the executives were men. All the assistants were women. There was almost no way to get from one side of the desk to the other side of the desk. It was a very intense, verbally abusive, sexually harassing environment. But it was my dream to work in that business. And so, but I didn't really have a plan. I mean, this is where we get into, there wasn't mentorship, in those days. There weren't guidebooks. There was like a, maybe an implied thing that you will do this until you get married or wise up or what have you. So I didn't know. So there's a bunch of stuff that happens. It's like, the career thing's not happening. I worked at a talent agency, where I learned a ton, but kind of got, stuck. There wasn't advancement. My heart was broken. I was stuck in my career. So I upped and moved to New York because I understood in some ways of, and this is sort of perfectionism adjacent. It was just, I knew things weren't working. And I somehow understood that change and doing something different, truly based on instinct, and then also very values based, was a movement forward.
Ooh,
right?
Yes.
Right? That's forward movement. I'm getting myself out of where I am. And even if I'm doing the same thing there, the active movement is enough change to make it worthwhile. And what am I learning from this? And it was almost like from the minute I got off that plane in New York, everything changed. And suddenly what I brought to the party was considered valuable here. And that's where then, looking back in hindsight many years later, I realized, I love music to this day. It feeds my soul, but I didn't really have any business in the music business because my strengths were not what was needed in the music business, which is really, you're either performing or you're really marketing and selling. I don't do either of those.
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller and a coach.
Well, and I want to go back to the storytelling element of it, because you mentioned that when, you're sitting here as a casting director, you're interviewing people. What are some things that you look for on that end of the table? Because we have so many performers who listen to this podcast. It's ridiculous. What are some things you look for that you're like, that's a person I want to work with, or, ooh, that's a big red flag?
So I work primarily in the unscripted space.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of similarities, but just to be clear about that. So one of the things in a big way, we're looking, the energy that you bring, right? And so how do you make the room feel? Because in the world that I inhabit, it's personality driven. Do you light up the room? Are you captivating in whatever that means so that, you're going to bring eyeballs because that's what we need. Right.
Yeah.
We're actually also looking in addition to skills because I teach skills. That's how I got into what I do. Right. Is I would find people and then sometimes it'd be like, now can you train them because you're looking for the ineffable. And once you find that, it's like, I can teach you to read a teleprompter. Yeah. But with that, we also look for emotional maturity or bandwidth because the world is way more risk averse and the budgets are much, much higher. And just to pause for a sec, it was interesting. There's a current documentary on Apple Plus about the supermodels and talking about Cindy Crawford at MTV. And it's like, she's an amazing model with absolutely no on-camera skills. And they were just like, you'd be great. Let's throw you on TV. Which was awesome. And that was the MTV way, and MTV and VH1, where I spent a decade, completely changed the culture and how we communicate. And it's all really valuable. But I bring that up because, Cindy was doing House of Style in the early 1990s. Now we're, 30 years later, we don't take those kinds of risks anymore.
Ooh, can you give an example? Like what would we have done in the 1990s that like absolutely wouldn't touch with a 15-foot pole now?
Oh my gosh. Well, so in the MTV thing, one was just taking somebody like Cindy Crawford and just like putting her on camera without any training. Just being like, you go do you.
Yeah.
That would have been fine. Right. Because, and then we just created shows and you would just throw stuff up there and it was okay. It was, and for me, it was such a phenomenal training ground because I got to cast once I was running that department. I mean, we did so much, we tried stuff. We just had so much more room to risk and experiment and go do things as long as you could do it inexpensively and like make a budget work. It was like, you've got free reign.
So I'm sorry, I'm kind of pivoting the question because I'm so genuinely curious. Why don't we take those risks anymore? And this actually lines perfectly with what we're talking about today, which was the shoulds. But like, why don't we take those risks anymore, especially in this like area of media? Okay.
That is such the right question to ask. So the one hand, there's us taking personal risks. Right? And personal creative risks. So that would be important. It's just, I took my own risk in stepping out from behind the camera and having a podcast and starting to create video content, et cetera, to grow my business, to grow my brand, to make more of an impact with the people I'm trying to reach. So that's a personal creative risk and you think it through, and you and I both know you don't have to release the first thing that you do. Think it through, have a concept, practice, rehearse, tap into all of that stuff that we know how. So there's that. But on a business level, that becomes like such a much bigger conversation about how industry works. For one, so now we have all this consolidation. So when I, was working at MTV Networks, it was still technically a startup, even though we didn't call it a startup, and all the attention wasn't there, right? It was still, cable was still kind of nascent, and there was just a lot more money in some ways in the economy. Now we live in a world where everybody in terms of media, there's so much debt now because everybody had to invest in streaming, which is doesn't generate the income that maybe one day it will. Consolidation. Almost everything is owned by private equity. And so the lot more risk averse, and there's all this pressure to produce results, right, in terms of return on investment. So I'm just really oversimplifying the business conversation.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
But the point is that it's we are way more risk averse, and it costs more to put out stuff. Everything is way more competitive. It's much harder to get eyeballs, right? Because so in the MTV days, which is like kind of the last era, and it really is a line in the sand about how old somebody is. It's like, if you're late Gen X, early Gen X or whatever, or older millennial, you remember coming home and watching TRL and everybody shared that experience.
Yeah.
Then, digital killed the radio star. Killed the video star, right? Because then the digital revolution happens, which is so important and a gift on so many ways. And you and I wouldn't be talking if that hadn't happened.
True.
But now that becomes like, so to me, it's the most incredible moment in history because now there's no barrier to entry and we can all create and put our content and our work out there. But what happens is then the audience scatters.
Oh, yes. Interesting. Well, and here's something I see a lot with people I work with or talk to who want to be in some way a face or a name, whether that's they want to be a TikTok influencer, they want to be a Broadway star, they want to be in Hollywood as like an HBO drama lead or stuff like that. They feel like no matter what they do, they have to do it perfectly. And it's like, if I'm going to put my first TikTok out there, it has to be the best TikTok in the entire world or else no one's going to care. And the annoying thing is, yes, we do have a demand for perfection and on the first try. And it deeply saddens me. But I also, how do we get to perceived perfection? No one's fucking perfect, but like, how do we get to the level that, like, for instance, I think of like Elise Myers. She's a huge name in the social media space. If you go way back to her first videos, it looks nothing like her current ones, but she had to put those out in order to get here. So I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts on that stress and that pressure that people put on themselves to be at a certain level on the first try?
Wow. Okay. There's so much going on there. So one, I want to quote a certain Nicole Baker, back to Nicole Baker, about there's no getting to 100 without taking steps 1 to 99. And I think that is such an important place to begin in this conversation because, and by the way, I totally understand that pressure because I've been on both sides of this. Yeah. But so when you feel like I can't put it out until it's at the level of XYZ, that's a whole other, like, that's when I get into the life and executive coaching and the life coaching that you do, Ms. Life Coach Baker over there, because it's like, well, what does that even mean to you? What does that look like to you? What wound are we addressing here that you feel that enormous pressure?
Preach it, girl. Yes.
Right? Because that is not at all audience facing at all. That's totally looking inward. You're not thinking about like the impact, and you're not imagining or visioning somebody watching your TikTok video and feeling joy or learning something or having their day made. You're thinking about like, I made that video, and you're turning the spotlight completely back on yourself. So that's okay. And I say that without judgment, but I mean, like, that is a lot to unpack in itself. The other thing too, though, is it's a fair point too, though. It's like when we talk about people who are massively successful now, it's like, but we have to start from today. And so you have to look at like, what are the standards now? So when we're talking about perfect, are we talking about professionalism? Like, and meeting the standards, right? And what does that look like? And how hard is that? Right?
Yes. I'm like over here like, oh my God. Yes. It's so real. Oh, keep going. You're nailing it.
Oh gosh, thank you. That means a lot coming from you. But and also like, what's the value of that? Like, that's important because I want to set a standard, but it's never been easier to make quality product, right? The equipment's, simpler, less expensive. We all walk around with one of the most advanced cameras of all time in our hands all day long. So that's amazing. But I even go back to, I studied film in college. And so I was film studies, which is really the history and aesthetics of film. So it's film as art history, but I still had to make some movies. And I might not have been the greatest director editor of all time. And, but so I remember one film, the professor said to me, it was a little bit sloppy in its editing and some of its aspects, but it was funny. And everybody in the class laughed. Like I got, people applauded. And he said, listen, nobody ever walked out of a movie because of bad editing.
Ooh, interesting.
And so he was basically, he was saying, it's like, it's not saying you want to go be a sloppy movie maker, but he was like, it's better to I entertained the audience. They loved it. They wanted more than if it had been quote unquote perfect and a snooze, which is so much about the work that I do with my clients on the communication side and however that shows up, because our focusing on perfect and the shoulds, right, is it's its own kind of safety net, and it's a comfort zone for ourselves, but it's a comfort zone that keeps us trapped because it's really not a safe place.
I want to talk about these shoulds. First and foremost, like when you say shoulds, how do you define that, or what world does that live in for you? Because I want to make sure everyone's on the same page before I dive into this topic with you, girl.
Well, one of the reasons I feel like we're so simpatico and when we connected is because to me, the shoulds are perfectionism adjacent. It's a manifestation of perfectionism. It's one of the ways we act out our perfectionism. So the shoulds to me are a trap. And I caught myself in the shoulds so much of my life, right? It's like, you should do this by this age. I mean, you kind of tapped into it earlier. It's like, if I haven't achieved this by this time, I should have been a mogul. I should have an Academy Award. I should have split an atom already. I should. I should be thinner. I should be richer. I should be more cool. I should. And so should is, there's a lot of guilt and shame attached to should. And there's a big threat implied in the word should, because and usually it's us talking to ourselves. I mean, we can should other people and we do all the time, but it's so much of the shoulds is internal dialogue. And it's like, I should do this because if I don't, and there's some implied bad thing going to happen.
What's your common shoulds that you deal with still?
Oh, wow. That's a great.
I'm sorry, I'm really hitting you heavy with these questions.
Wow. I have to sit and think about that for a sec because I've worked on this for so long. But I mean, it's funny how it shows up. So one, is just, to be fair, one that always comes up on it every day is like, I should be doing this for my business. Like I should be chasing the shiny object, right? So we all get stuck in those shoulds. And this is, I guess I could pause and talk about like how we reframe, because you have to teach yourself to kind of Byron Katie your way through it and go, is that true? What's another way I can look at this? What are my options? Because it's like, because some people say to you all the time, like, you should be on TikTok. You should have a podcast. You should take this class. You should sign up for this thing. You should have 100,000 followers by now. Those are all shoulds that keep us trapped. And we hear it and we're like, they're right. Mm-hmm. They're right. And it's so I just think that's all over the place. People are like, you should go in and ask for a raise. I'm like, okay, maybe, but it's like, I don't know how to do that. Or I don't know if the timing's right. I mean, there's so many other things. And sometimes shoulds can, masquerade as well-intentioned, but I just think it's such a heavy thing. And honestly, Louise Hay in her first book was like, it should be banished. That's a should. We should banish the shoulds. But also, I mean, so there are things I loved with like, exceptional shoulds, like, you should care about the environment. You should take care of your health. There are some, you should be kind and, live the golden rule. Yeah. There are lots of, legitimate shoulds, but it's when you stop and ask yourself, when I'm saying should, what am I really saying? And a healthy reframe would be to say, I want or I choose.
Ooh, I've heard I want, I love, I choose. And I feel like especially because I've done this exercise with people where, for instance, I see this a lot when people are wanting to start businesses, like the algorithm listens to us and they start showing us ads of like, here's how you build a business in 30 days. Meh. And it's like, here's how you make $100,000 because you should be making $100,000 in your first 6 weeks of opening up a business, which I think is absolute crap to begin with. Those are unicorn stories. That's great, but a lot of them takes really hard blood, sweat, and tears at the beginning, and it's not 6 weeks.
1 to 99, as Nicole Baker taught me.
Yes, but when people come to me and they're saying I feel like I should be doing more. I feel like I should be further ahead. I feel like I should be making X amount of money. I normally say to them something along the lines of, "Do you want that?"
Thank you.
And then they go,
1,000%.
Oh, it's asking them, do you want that? And do you want all the stuff that's going to come along with it? For instance, I was literally just having this conversation. They said, I feel like I should be posting 5 times a day on TikTok. And I was like, holy hell, we need to have a conversation. And I asked them, I was like, do you want what goes along with that? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, that's, filming 5 videos a day, 7 days a week. That's editing those videos. That's writing captions. That's searching for hashtags. That's engaging with your followers and your account and your comments and everything that goes along with it. Do you want that? And they took a moment and they're like, I don't know where I'd fit that in. And I was like, yeah, I don't know where you would either. So do you want that? And they said, absolutely not. And we were like, what if you posted once a day, 3 times a week? Like, what would that look like? And they're like, that's probably a lot more manageable. And I'm like, yeah, we don't have to burn ourselves out in order to feel like, oh, I did a good job. You know, I see that a lot with the shows.
Oh, 1,000%. And that really tapped into capacity. It also tapped into something else that I've actually experienced. And this is where it's like well-meaning shoulds, intersecting with the wants, but I've gone to like vision board workshops, which I love. Like I could vision board forever. And, but sometimes people like, oh no, you should have a private plane on there. That's the one that comes up a lot. Like you should use a private plane because that's indicative of like, how big you're dreaming. And I had to finally step back because, pleaser and nice girl that I am from the suburbs, I didn't want to contradict the person leading the workshop. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll put a private plane. And it's like private plane, nice, but you know what? It doesn't feed my soul. That's not my should. I was like, you know what? If I could be on a crowded bus with goats and chickens if that's the best way to get to that, remote mountain thing that I'd rather get to that place in Bali. However I get there, it's not about the private plane for me. It's not to say that it's not for someone else, but I meant like, that's an example where we get kind of, ushered or railroaded into some collective should thinking or about what should matter to us, because that's what even happened. That's a version of that with a person with, you should be posting 5 TikTok videos a day. It's like, do you even have the capacity for that? And then also, that's the point. It's like the other question there is like, do you enjoy making videos?
Yeah. Yeah. And will you still enjoy it after 5 a day, 7 days a week? Oh, that's so good. So I'm curious for you, how do you take your shoulds and turn them into wants? Like, even if it's totally changing the final part of that sentence. Like if I'm saying I should, what's a should you hear a lot with your clients? I'm curious.
Oh my gosh. So a big should would be, or the understanding is like, I should, do a perfect video, or I should do a perfect segment. I should do a perfect TED talk, keynote, what have you. So right there, same thing again, going honoring people who are listening. I should do a perfect audition. Mm-hmm. I really want this gig, so I should, or I have to. I got to be perfect.
So how do you do the mindset shift with that?
Well, one, it's like, okay, really? Okay. So in this case, it's so subjective. Like first we start with definitions. So please define for me what the perfect audition is for you. What's happening that makes it perfect? And a lot of the stuff, that I work with clients, because it gets into right away about getting the words right. That's where it's starting from. I got all the words right, so it was perfect. And I was like, wow, that's really, really limiting and very, very narrow in scope, because I can get all the words right and be flat and boring. So I achieved my goal. Like I didn't flub is what it's coming up with, right? That I got it, quote unquote, right, or that was perfect because it was. And then, so it's like, well, so that you're not achieving your goal. So now we have to understand, it's like, what is the value? What is on the other side? If we're going to get, very literal in the audition, it's like, well, what do they need to see? Is your version of quote unquote perfect in sync with what their version of perfect is?
Ooh,
because it's totally subjective, right? What do we need to see? It's like, I just, on my podcast just had the most amazing women, Brooke and Mary, who were legends in the commercial acting space in New York. And I mean, like literally everyone who's anyone has taken their course, and then they've cast legendary commercials for 20, 30 years. Right. And so they talked about that because they said, first and foremost, you have to be yourself. Mm. Right. So if you're coming in trying to be what you think is perfect, meaning therefore you haven't brought you to the party. So you could have gotten all the words right or gone through the motions, quote unquote, perfectly, but you didn't bring you. So therefore it wasn't perfect. In fact, in their book, that might be a fail, or at least it's not going to get you a call back or, continue the process, and you're not going to get the job. And so we can also get into that in music, the idea, anything about being technically perfect, but there's no soul. Missing the element of passion and emotion.
Speaking of my musical theater heart right now, absolutely. The amount of times that because I did a lot of opera and classical music. It was part of my program. It was very, very, you had to marry the two together with pop and classical. And I fucking hated singing classical. I hated it so much. It sucked my soul away, and I sounded like it sucked my soul away. I could not have been more dull and boring. But technically, I sang it perfect, but there was zero soul, and I had to do a recital that was all classical. It was just part of the graduation process. And it was literally like, okay, how fast can I get this done? How fast can I get this done? And the second it was over, I was like, oh, thank God. But I'm not going to lie, for a long time after that recital, I beat myself up into oblivion because it was, you didn't do it in a way that was interesting, and therefore people weren't entertained. Because I've always been about like, how can I make sure people feel entertained? And it used to be very people pleaser driven. And I was like, oh my God, people in the audience were bored, and therefore you wasted their afternoon. Like, it was a mega mental beatdown, because even though technically it was quote unquote perfect, it was in my mind the biggest failure, which sucked. It really sucked.
That's so painful too, because the binary thing about that, that it's either or.
Oh, our perfectionism brain loves the black and white, don't
we?
Right.
And I actually want to honor too anybody who's listening who's a dancer, because dance is about perfection. And the drilling of that for decades and decades and decades. And I've worked with many people in fitness who've come from dance, and performers and hosts and speakers who come from dance. And so I want, first of all, so I get it. Like, there's no judgment there. And like, that is what is required. So I think in some ways it's about, at the same time, tapping into some kind of joy for yourself versus dread. Because that is where it's always being looked at, as like, are you technically perfect? And if you are part of a chorus of dancers, or your background dancers or whatever, you're not supposed to, be so charismatic that you're taking, attention away from the lead. So this is can get to be a very nuanced conversation about what that is. And I know separately, you and I have also spoken about, because for many people, it's the perfectionist streak that gets you to that place.
Yeah. Let's open that up conversation, because we need to. For perfectionists, a huge thing is, if I am not pushing myself to the absolute brink, demanding perfection of myself, demanding that high achiever level, then I will never get to the place where I am. First and foremost, the people you've worked with, have you seen that personality trait in them?
Oh, all the time. I mean, now we see a spectrum, because I have a lot of people, they walk in the door at the beginner level, which my dreamers, who I love. And my role, I feel like, is help dreamers become doers. So they're actually, making and accomplishing on the road to becoming a game changer. But because if you don't have the drive and the work ethic and the commitment, the steps 1 to 99 in your DNA, it's not going to happen for you, because the world is, too competitive, and just about anybody can have a video go viral now and have fame for 5.5 seconds. So, but anything sustainable or to build a career, et cetera, right? It does take drive. So I absolutely see that. And then a positive thing is, I also see, you really see the difference in people who are super accomplished. They're like, no, let's do it again. Let's do it again. I mean, it's like it doesn't matter how successful they are. They understand, I have to rehearse, or we're going to try this different ways and figure out what is the most impactful way. But they're not stuck in the perfects. Do you know what I mean? They're not sitting there going, it's like, yeah, but let's look at this. Does this line land better this way or that way? They've started to build criteria to understand, why are we working on this? Why are we doing just, one more take? Why are we trying one more thing? It's just like, I feel like incrementally it could just be better. And better is defined as like more successful, meaning it's going to, land better, reach more people, be more impactful, be funnier, etc. I think sorry. I was going to say is the big difference in any of this is now we get into the intersection of perfectionism, the shoulds, and your self-esteem. Right. And so one of my own funny stories, going back to your original question of like how this has showed up in my life, is when I was first really starting to understand this about 10 years ago, and the intersection with shame and et cetera, was the year so much was going on in business and life and my kids and family. And I didn't get Christmas cards out that year, which is laughable.
Dun, dun,
but
dun.
The shame that I felt that the world was going to see that I didn't have it all together all the time. And so I can laugh about it now, but I had so much hung up in the fact that's like the idea, because I got so much positive validation. It's like, I can't believe you do all this and you were able to bake cupcakes for the thing at school. I can't believe you do all that and you still send out printed Christmas cards. You're amazing.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yes. I find all my value there. And then the year I couldn't. And then I was like, and guess what? Then of course, perfectionist streak, I found a workaround. I was like, oh, you know what? We're going to do Happy New Year.
How hard did you push yourself to the brink to get those Happy New Year cards out?
Yeah, well, you had a little window because there's January, and but it was really funny because I just felt so great, like, oh my God, I solved the problem. But I can laugh at it now, right, easily, because then I started to understand it's like no one cared. No one cared but me. That was my own false standard, and it was very liberating to be like, like serious stuff going on, couldn't do it. These things matter more than, and showing up for people and being present through important moments in life were much more important than getting the printed Christmas cards out and keeping up the facade of that I somehow had it all together, whatever that means. And so I think we all have versions of that in our lives.
I was literally before you and I hopped on, I was on with a client and she's in what we call push periods, which is basically like something's needing a lot more attention and energy from her life right now. And, if we have 5 categories in our life and one of those categories is demanding 150% from you, what I see a lot of perfectionists do is still demand 100+% from every other area of your life.
Yes.
So Christmas cards would be a beautiful example here, still demanding 100% to get those Christmas cards out. But when we're in push periods, or honestly, even when we're in just like nose to the grind periods, like when I was an actor in Chicago, I was waking up at 4 a.m. I was standing outside for 12 hours. I was not in a normal state of life. And yet I still demanded 100% from every other chapter and every other category. And it made me, I never could meet 100% because it was impossible. And so it meant I was constantly living in this state of you're not enough here, you're not enough here, you're not enough here, and just beating myself up to absolute oblivion. And it wasn't until, honestly, in the last few years that I started researching and figuring out, okay, if I take this down to 60% and this one down to 40%, I mean, I'm in a push period in my life right now, like I've never been in my entire life. And one of those had to go down to 0, absolute 0 to the oblivion, and no one died. No one burst into flames. Nothing has fallen apart. Like this area of my business is not dead forever. It's just dark now. And dark meaning like it's at 0%. And so I think that it's important to remember like those shoulds, I think also can come up in, I should be perfect in all of these areas. And it is literally impossible to demand that level of output from yourself in all those areas, especially like, you're saying like these people who are really hard workers, these people who are very, like in that area where they need to like get their asses into gear, like thinking like more beginners and getting into doers. I see so many people still try to demand that same level from everywhere else. Do you see that in those beginners as well?
First of all, that was such a great story and so beautifully laid out, like that, and amazing takeaway. But of course, the dialogue in my head was the old me would have been like, well, you should be able to do this.
Yes, exactly. Because I think that so much of this,
you should be functioning at this level.
Mm-hmm. Like you have 5 minutes, you should be pushing harder. I see that a lot. Like if I have a spare 5 minutes or a spare hour, or even it's 9 p.m. and I could go to bed, or I could push myself to the absolute brink for 30 minutes. It's like, people will normally choose the latter, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. But that's the should dialogue is alive and well and very loud and amplified in the story that you just gave. So, it's interesting. So the disconnect for a lot of people who come to me, usually like students or more beginning and dipping their toes. And by the way, this could be anybody at a stage in their career, because often I have people, experts in subjects who are very successful in their career, whatever that is. Let's say it could be, real estate or psychology or in the beauty industry, et cetera. And so there is a should attached.
Yeah.
So some is just, I should be doing this for my business. Or or also just like I'm successful, so I should be good at this. I'm smart. I should be able to do this. And it's like, well, okay. But I meant like, again, let's, reframe the conversation, because what does that mean? Are we talking about transferable skills? I mean, I feel like it's all doable and figure outable.
Yes.
But the point is, there's often a gap in the beginning idea to the actual execution and the steps required to get there, which would, first of all, the mental heavy lifting that some people don't want to do, which is the creative side or the pre-production side, as I would say. It's like, well, what are you going to talk about? What is this? What does it mean? Who's your audience? All the things, like the stages that we break down. And then there is the crafting and the execution of it, and the rewriting and the practicing and et cetera. So, I mean, some people fall by the wayside because they figure out, it's like, you know what, I just don't enjoy it. Like, this isn't fun. And then it's also fair to be like, I didn't get into my field. Like, I didn't decide to be a brain surgeon because I wanted to make TikTok videos. Or I'm just making that up, but you know what I mean? Like, I do. And that's been a challenge in the digital age for many, many people who, because suddenly it happened to me. It came out of nowhere. It's like, doing your job isn't it enough. Now you have to like market it at the nth level.
Yes.
So that's anxiety inducing for many of us, to say the least. So people drop off in that phase. There's a lot of, there's also a misconception like this should be easy. Oh, here's one of my favorite shoulds. It's such a misconception. Is like that anybody, sort of over 40 is just like, you should be able to hire a 25-year-old for no money to do that thing for you. It happens all the time.
Can you talk that out a little more?
Oh my God, there's this sort of blanket idea. I get it. I hear it all the time from people that the answer to your digital marketing issues and your social media is the thing that you have not found yet is the right inexpensive 25-year-old who apparently can do this in their sleep. Because there's this whole idea that, and my kids are 26 and 23, right? So it's like they're digitally native. And they're pretty savvy, but there's this whole idea that just because you know how to use apps and do all this, that you're also really good at social media marketing, which means messaging and executing and targeting audiences and understanding like, well, what should we be budgeting for those ads and how are we going to reach people? There's such a massive disconnect into what is actually required. So one, it's really dismissive, as if this digital thing that causes me anxiety it's completely mysterious. But for the people who understand it, the 25-year-olds, it's just remarkably easy and anybody can do it.
Oh, golly. Oh,
and
God.
so that's like a mangled version of the shoulds.
Yes.
And pushing perfectionism onto other people.
Okay, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I saw this all the time at my school, was them pushing perfectionism onto us. And I think it's why, I've talked to most of my graduating class and even some, sandwiching my graduating class, and every single person walked out of that school with perfectionism. And I don't think that's just unique to my school. I've talked to a lot of other performing arts schools, or anyone who is in that kind of industry in an academic way. And it was constantly told to us. Well, first of all, we had things like weigh-ins every 6 weeks where, like, if you did not meet it, horrified. They finally got rid of them. I'm so proud of them. Way too late, but I'm proud they got rid of them. So, like, for instance, the Monday after Thanksgiving, we'd all go in and get weighed. And like, that was always demanded. Like, you need to be at a certain weight, and you get weighed when you're going in, like, you're 18. So of course that's the number that I have in my head throughout when I'm 22. And I was not the same weight when I was 18 and when I was 22 in the slightest.
And that correct weight is based on what information? I mean, the standards,
dancers. Right? So, it was the dancing program. Yeah.
Right. No, but I understand. But I meant like that's its own algorithm.
Yeah.
That is a false construct, is what I'm getting at.
Precisely. And like that's only one example. There was also like, you should be practicing X amount of hours. It was always framed in a should. So it's so
always
interesting we're talking about. It's always framed as a should. Well, okay. I want to, like, in our own heads, how do you start catching the shoulds? Because it's so automatic, right? How do you start to open your eyes and start to catch it so that we can rewrite and choose the shoulds, or even reframe them to I choose? How do you start catching them?
Well, the beginning is honestly making the choice and the self-awareness around that. Because you start to catch yourself when you become aware of it, and you've made the commitment to yourself to sort of break free of it. and also realize that the breaking free of that and reframing it becomes the key, or a key to a more successful, more abundant, healthier life. And so it just begins. I'm going to say that that's the same step for any kind of language around self-talk.
Ooh, yes.
You just, get used to the check-ins and just catch yourself, because I love that you asked it. And because I forget that it's a first step. I forget that I had to take this first step, but I've been doing it for so long now that it is second. I mean, I'm catching myself all day long going, in self-judgment about myself, or, even like I'll be on the subway because I'm in New York, and I'll be like, oh, that wasn't a very kind thought, Barb. That's, everyone's got their struggles today. I don't know what's going on in their life, but so we can't, so it's accepting that we're all human. You never completely eliminate the shoulds. You just catch them.
Oof. I could talk to you forever. I truly could, but I also want to respect your time. I have one more question for you before we get into segments. And that is, we talked about this off air before going into this, but your eye for talent, I mean, your bio is so fucking impressive. Like, it is so beautiful.
God, thank you.
No, I mean it. And something that you mentioned in it is that you gave early breaks to people like, Amy Schumer, to Christy Teigen, Wayne Brady, who I grew up watching Whose Line Is It Anyway? So I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh. But I'm curious, what is it about these types of people who walk into the room that makes you go, them? I want to work with them. Is it something in your gut? Is it a common trait that you see within these people? Because again, there's so many performers and people who are wanting this type of work who listen to the show, and I'd love for them to just get a peek behind the curtain. What are some things you look for?
Well, all the examples that you gave, they were all singularly themselves,
Yeah.
and this is because this is so subjective, and it's not something somebody can necessarily take away or practice. But I will say they were all themselves. They were really working hard. I mean, literally, like in terms of work ethic, I'm going to presume, because anybody who's got a sustained career, is that they asked questions and took good advice from people that they could trust to listen to guide them. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, getting the training, doing the work, trying different things. It's to the point of like taking risks. They all pursued passions and interests. Because, Chrissy, I could talk about all day, because it's like, she's so famous now that it's easy to forget. It's like she's, a model. Like, she's coming from being inside a very specific world, and she starts to break out by being an early adopter to social media. And she was freaking hilarious on Twitter, which was the platform she really started on. And I remember she, like, this random post she wrote about like spending hours, getting the knots out of a gold chain. And she's like, she's like, see, that's the kind of girl I am, really you focus. And I was like, okay, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. And then on top of it, all three of them, by the way, here gets, I'm glad you asked this. All three of them, strong point of view and very confident in sharing it in their own way. So again, Chrissy was funny and had and was not afraid to offend people, and was extremely unique and had her own distinct voice. And so there's that. Amy Schumer comes in, very, very distinct voice, like, a woman in comedy. I mean, she was just freaking hilarious. And by the way, then my job as a casting director is to explain to my clients why this is helpful and important to their project. And so the same thing, with Wayne Brady, because he was like funny, but these were music themed shows, by the way. And so it's like, they all had a love of music. It was like, and you don't see that every day. And also, like Wayne, deep knowledge, and, and again, and then also, for all of Chrissy's outrageousness that was outward facing, total professionalism. And so, by the way, and I bring that up, I never worked with Snooki from Jersey Shore, but I always bring this up as an example. It's like, she wouldn't be where she is and have a sustained career, whatever the episode, if she was not professional, meaning showing up on time, prepared. I think of Billy Eichner, who I'm a huge fan of, and I used to bring in him early in his career. Nobody knew what to do with him, because he was just so wildly original and ahead of the curve that it was like he was like 10 years too soon. but now he has a massive career as like an actor, producer, director. But the same thing is like, he had his Billy on the Street character who completely took a format, man on the street, and made it his own. And it was incredibly outrageous. And for anybody who doesn't know that, he would go up to people and, ask questions on the street, and then he would insult people. And he was really, really funny doing it. But the thing is, like, he didn't come into meetings and insult the executives. He understood, I'm playing a character and I'm doing this and this is the value of it. And he, kept at it, but he'd come into a meeting and he was professional and prepared and doing what you have to do. So, and then there is the thing. It's like, funny's funny. And if like, and entertaining, and you look for that spark. Mm-hmm. And so I'd rather, in my field, it's like, I'd rather you be technically imperfect and bring something that nobody else has, because we can figure out the technical.
Oof. Thank you for sharing that. Really and truly. Thank you. That was really so beautiful. And I think people needed to hear that today, really and truly. I always ask 2 questions to every guest who comes on the show. The first is, how were you a perfectionist this week? Because we always hear from people, especially in the personal development, self-help world, you have to be this type of way. You have to wake up at 4. You have to da-da-da-da-da-da. And I got so tired of them perceiving like they were just like the perfect little personal development student. And I was like, I need to know how you were a mess. So how are you a mess this week, Barbara?
Oh my gosh. Well, okay. First of all, I love that so much, because my heart used to break, going into chats sometimes about people who were doing all sorts of systems and blaming themselves when because it's like, I can't get up at 4:00 in the morning and I can't do this, that, or the other. And I didn't feel it was professional of me to go in and criticize, somebody's system on a Facebook group, but my heart was breaking because I wanted to be like, it's not you. That's not the right system for you.
Personal development is personal. Yes.
Yes. It's not you. It's okay. It's like, and so to your point, it, really trying to like a state of grace, is that, yes. So very similar to you. And I love that you talked about this on my podcast. It's like, I wake up every day. It's like, what's going to move me forward? What are my incremental goals this week? And my thing is like giving myself grace for, it's like, okay, some of the stuff got done.
Yeah. Yes.
That would be it, but not all of it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yes. I love that. I love that so much. My second question for you is, what is a goal, big or small, does not matter, that you are either in the process of achieving or have recently achieved that we get to celebrate with you?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm going to put this out to the universe. And I can't really say that much about it, but okay. I have been, because this is like a big dream, big goal, feeds my soul. One of my besties and my writing partner and I have been working on a project for over 3 years. We started in July 2020 during the pandemic, and we got incredible news.
Yes,
that's
congratulations!
We got incredible news that signifies the moving forward in a significant way. And so it is a joyous thing. I can't even tell you. It's hard for me. Like, I haven't even processed it yet. You know what I mean? Because it's just like,
I hope you celebrated your face off for this. That's so exciting. Congratulations.
We ate candy bars together. That was it.
I'll take that. I'll take that. Depends on which candy bar, We
had hugs and candy bars. I know it was kind of like, what I was to say, potpourri, a mixture, a melange, a variety would have been the simple word. Like, thank you. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. Yeah, but it's just like I went into a bodega and I was just grabbing stuff off like, oh, okay, that looks good. Oh, I haven't seen one of those in years. Let's try one of those. And we just threw them on a bed and we just started opening them.
I love that. You are amazing. Thank you for being here. Last question is, where can people find you? Throw all the things at them.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for asking. So first and foremost, I'm so super easy to find everywhere. So if you just remember my name, Barbara Abel or Barbara Barna Abel, and Google that, I come up all over the place. My website is Abel Intermedia, ABEL, like Abel in the Bible. I always have to remind people. AbelIntermedia.com. My podcast is there. My contact information is there. And then, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I'm still officially on X, formerly known as Twitter, but not so much.
It's so hard to think about it. Like, okay, yes, it's X now, not Twitter. And then Threads was the thing for like the hottest of seconds.
For a weekend. And then it bummed me out. And
really
then,
did.
I actually missed Twitter because I was an early adopter and I used to love Twitter parties. And to this day, I still feel like it is the best place to get breaking news in real time.
Oh, interesting.
And I have an amazingly curated, I don't even know if people know you can make lists. There's so many great things that got destroyed. And I only bring that up because I'm putting it out to the universe and smart people who listen to your podcast. I would love some awesome person to come around and innovate a platform that allows for that exchange of information in real time.
Oh my God, that would be amazing. Okay, listeners, you have a task. Go do it. There you go.
By the way, and just to finish, it doesn't have to be perfect.
No.
It just has to work and be inclusive and welcoming and safe.
Super imperfect success right there. Barbara, you're amazing. Thank you for being on the show today.
Oh, a million thank yous. I cherish you.
Thank you for listening to Camera Ready and Able. If you're interested in one-on-one training for you or your team, please shoot me a note. And please be sure to visit abelintermedia.com and download my free ebook, 12 Tips for Success on Camera. And as always, hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review if you haven't already.